important to help us and partner countries continue to diversify our trade. And Franz, in his slide, showed that Canada has concluded 14 free trade agreements. I'll just note that those 14 agreements, many of them are multilateral. So we, in fact, have agreements in place with 51 countries around the world. And I may be mistaken, but I think we've concluded more free trade agreements than any other country, which shows our commitment to free trade. But we're seeing increasingly a backlash around the world to free trade and some of the principles of trade. And I think it's critically important for us to show that the benefits of these trade agreements can reach all segments of society. And one of the ways that we can do that is through labor provisions that help to address those decent work deficits and show that trade does not derogate from labor standards, but in fact can be used to help promote and protect those standards. So to that end, it has long been Canada's practice to seek labor provisions in those FTAs that indeed do promote and protect the fundamental principles and rights at work as defined by the ILO. And that includes, of course, the elimination of child labor. Canada has been committed to cooperating with its free trade partners and other countries as well, since child labor is very much a global problem where the effects of it are indeed transnational. So in fact, it's Canada's view that free trade agreements are really an important tool in this global effort to eliminate child labor. However, we recognize that the provisions that we put into these free trade agreements, whether they be enforcement-based or otherwise, and the goodwill that these creates are really not enough. In order to foster the success of Canada's trade partner efforts to eliminate child labor, we also seek avenues for cooperation. So in this respect, one of Canada's key tools is really the provision of technical assistance to current and potential trade partners to support their fulfillment of their international trade and labor commitments. And we have been doing this since 2011. And by fostering compliance with fundamental labor rights, the negotiation of labor provisions in FTAs, and the provision of that technical assistance, we're really seeking to reinforce that international trade system and to help prevent labor exploitation in global supply chains. Franz talked about the importance of capacity building, and technical assistance for building that capacity has really been a key element of Canada's trade and labor approach, because it really does facilitate the engagement and the collaboration on labor issues with our partner countries and stakeholders, as well as the implementation of those labor provisions in FTAs. So many of the projects that we have funded in this aspect really do address child labor specifically. In fact, over the last 5 years, Canada has funded 7 projects around the world that address child labor. And this includes a current project on trade labor and fundamental principles and rights at work in Southeast Asia. And it's in this context that we've had the privilege to work with Salim and other ILO colleagues here who have coordinated this side event. This regional project covers all of the members of ASEAN, and the project aims to facilitate sustained adherence to international labor standards, particularly fundamental labor rights, by enabling better compliance with and enforcement of domestic labor laws, the enhanced protection of women's access to representation, and the elimination of child labor and forced labor. And in doing this, the project really addresses the challenges facing ASEAN's vulnerable labor sector in the context of what is really a rapidly growing economy. And we hope that this will be achieved by establishing practical pathways for ASEAN member states to comply with international labor commitments, such as in existing free trade agreements, and through activities focused on capacity building and training for workers, industry, government organizations, both at the regional and at the country levels. The project is being implemented through collaboration with ASEAN's executive bodies and organizations at the level of member states. The elimination of child labor has really been a major focus of the project to date through engagement and collaboration with organizations, including, of course, the ASEAN Secretariat, but also UNICEF and Terre des Hommes Netherlands. For instance, the project was really a key facilitator in what Megha just spoke about, the adoption of ASEAN's roadmap on the prevention of child labor. Collaboration on that roadmap really enabled the project to engage with the ASEAN Secretariat and to support research on the impacts of trade agreements and labor provisions across ASEAN member states, as well as to contribute to the development of ASEAN guidelines on occupational health and safety in the informal sector. And we really think that these ongoing collaborations really enable the project to position fundamental rights and principles as a cross-cutting component of ASEAN's economic agenda, and to really strengthen that integration of labor rights into trade and investment frameworks. Another notable achievement has been the project's recent publication of what I think is a really important guide. And Celine may be speaking to this a bit later on. It's about understanding rights and work, guide to key terms related to fundamental principles and rights at work in trade and supply chains in Southeast Asia. And I think this is really a practical guide that would help governments, workers, employers, policymakers, and the wider public really better understand that intersection between labor rights, trade, and supply chains. So let me just conclude on this point by saying that, as I said at the outset, Canada is very much of a trading nation, and it's our belief that we need free trade, we need global trade, and we need to use these free trade agreements and trade negotiations as a fundamental and critical tool in eliminating child labor and to demonstrate that trade really can benefit all segments of society. And some of this capacity building that I've spoken about hopefully can be used to facilitate that objective. Thank you, Celine.
Thank you very much, Rakesh, for sharing trade policy perspective and highlighting how labor provision can help also reduce decent work deficit, the linkage across all the fundamental principles and rights at work, and also the role that development cooperation do help within that framework. So now we've heard about the architecture and regional commitments and trade policy perspectives. And I would like now to turn to our social partners, and would like to ask them, still framing around the guiding question this is from Dr. Pasha from the workers organization. From your perspective, what is one practical adjustment in policy use, coordination, or follow-up that could realistically strengthen the contribution of labor provision to child labor outcomes in light of what we've just heard? So, Dr. Pasha, over to you. Thank you.
Thank you, Salim, and good afternoon, sisters and brothers. I speak on behalf of the International Trade Union Confederation, and for your information, many of you know that the International Trade Union Confederation is the world's largest federation of national trade union centers, representing 207 million workers in 163 countries and territories with 325 national affiliates. Established in 2006, it serves as the global voice for working people, focusing on the promotion and defense of workers' rights and interests through international cooperation, campaigning, and advocacy. Now, let me come back to the question, and let me be very direct. Child labor is not a technical failure. It is the outcome of poverty wages, weak social protection, limited access to education, and restriction on trade union rights. So, where decent work for adults is missing, child labor fills the gap. Regarding trade agreements, we understand that now trade agreements increasingly contain labor provisions. They refer to ILO standards, but references alone do not remove a child from a farm, a construction site, or from a factory. Why? Because we all know that enforcement is weak, and workers are too often absent from implementation. So again, I mean, if unions cannot organize, if bargaining is limited, or if labor inspection is under-resourced, then provisions remain words. So our proposal is very practical: make trade unions central to monitoring, to complaints, to remediations. Because, I mean, the workers are the first to know, and without freedom of associations, no early warning; without collective bargaining, no living wage; without social protection, vulnerability grows; and without education, children lose their future. Friends, let us, I mean, I will not delve into the details because our previous speakers already highlighted the recent agreements, but in a very quick manner, let us briefly look at the recent agreements from the trade unions perspective. Indonesia, European Union makes commitments binding and creates advisory groups. We must say that it is an important progress, but there is still no mechanism to act directly against a company without violating rights. Again, if we will see, like India, EU provides consultations, yet without enforceability or a guaranteed rules for union. Then again, India, UK, which was signed last year. And I understand that this Monday they had a discussion on again India UK trade agreement. So India UK recognizes the elimination of forced and child labor, but the labor chapter is outside dispute settlement. So again, what I wanted to say that implementation depends mainly on political will. That is why trade unions everywhere repeat three priorities. The first, binding and enforceable provisions. Second, a formal role for unions in monitoring. Third, corporate accountability, including at facility level. Colleagues, let me turn to coherence between trade and development. When people is space to support farmers, all vulnerable workers is reduced, income decline, risk increase, and children are pushed into work. If adult employment is insecure, child labor rises. No due diligence systems can replace decent work, a living wage, social protection, and access to education. Now, there's another way that already works. And I must say that Global Union Federation, I must say that they are also playing a vital role, and we have to recognize their role in combating the child labor. You might be knowing about Building and Wood Workers International, the support like action in constructing and building materials. Then we have like our IUF, which is working for across agriculture and food supply chains. We have like a International Domestic Workers Federation, advances protection in domestic work. We have like Education International campaigns for compulsory quality public education. So they are contributing in such a way that eradication of child labor can be a real thing. So friends, again, when unions are present, prevention improves, remedies are faster, and children stay in school. This is practice. So the choice is clear: connect labor provisions with decent work, with social dialogue, with enforcement, with corporate responsibilities, and they can deliver change. Keep them distant from workers, and they risk becoming paperwork. From Durban to Marrakesh, what we understand that we have made some progress, no doubt, but without stronger rights at workplace and supply chain level, we will continue to face the same challenge. Child labor ends when adults have decent work, when wages are sufficient, when social protection exists, when education is accessible, and when trade unions are recognized as partners. Give unions the space to operate, and we will help deliver. So with these words, I will stop here. Thank you so much for listening me patiently.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pasha, for highlighting that child labor is structural and not technical, and that the emphasis on implementation reality and the role of social dialogue. Let me now invite Mr. Datuk to share the employer's perspective. Mr. Datuk, over to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Salim. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Yeah, I'm Samsudin from Kuala Lumpur. It is about 8:30 p.m. in Kuala Lumpur here. And thank you for inviting me to share some of the perspective of the employers as far as child labor is concerned. And Malaysia is very much a trading nation, a small trading nation, but it's very important that we do comply with all the international requirements as far as child labor are concerned. And so, of course, yes, Malaysia had entered into various trade agreements, but thus far, most of the trade agreements are without any social clauses, except when we actually entered into the CPTPP. And of course, the new trade agreements being negotiated between Malaysia and various other countries and trading blocs also containing the social clauses. So it is really very important for us here to address the issue of child labor. And of course, when we talk about child labor, it is something not going to be easy to be addressed, to be eliminated, because say, for example, the Malaysian context, we are talking very much about the use of children as part of the workforce in terms of various, I would say, areas of small trade, especially by family members, things like that. And it is very common, in fact, in Malaysia, for children to assist their parents in small trade, night markets, things like that, during their free time, their break time from school, things like that. And this is basically part of the culture. So how do we then tell these parents that it is not okay for them to actually ask their children to assist them in their daily trades, things like that? Of course, the other part is basically when we talk about supply chain, we do talk about supply chain. The issue of supply chain is basically, that the smaller players are being expected to actually comply fully with the increasing standards of social clauses. And this is a question of whether it is really sustainable for them to do their business in the event they are asked to actually comply with all the I would say, costs involved in trying to comply with the social clauses. Say, for example, it's very normal for buyers, for example, to tell the suppliers to say that, hey, you all must comply with this supply chain policies. And of course, you must comply with all the increased social standards, things like that. But unfortunately, the price that actually they offer to purchase the products of this supply chain remain the same. Yeah, and of course, the suppliers, the smaller players, are actually taking care of all the increased costs. So, of course, obviously, this involves what you call it as whether it is sustainable for the smaller players to actually comply with the new requirements without any adjustment in the pricing. So this is where perhaps we, as the stakeholders, need to relook at these practices so that the smaller players are being assisted in trying to comply with the new requirements. And at least if there is some price adjustment, then the smaller players are not being asked to fully bond the cost involved in increasing the social clauses as per the new trade agreements. Yeah. So without that, I would say it's going to be very difficult for the smaller players to survive, to sustain their businesses. And when we talk to the smaller businesses, they say that their margin are getting smaller and smaller. And of course, previously we're talking about at least about 10% margin, but now if they can make 5%, they are happy indeed. And of course, this 5% thing is becoming smaller and smaller to the extent that it may not be feasible for them to go on with their businesses. So this is, I think, is something that I think the stakeholders has to think hard about it on how to really assist the smaller players within the supply chain to actually bear the increasing cost of compliance with the social clauses, including child labor. And of course, child labor do exist, and of course, it is not going to be easy to eliminate them. And this is where perhaps when we talk about trying to assist employers to eliminate child labor within the supply chain, then possibly when we talk about trying to actually assist them, then I think it should be more like risk-based. Something like in the event the sector is really risky, then more resources has to be actually put into those kind of sectors so that then it is more like a targeted thing that we are talking about, and it's not something that is going to be very difficult for the smaller players to actually comply with. So, ladies and gentlemen, it's very, very important actually for us to actually relook at the way we do things when we talk about trying to actually get the smaller players to comply. then how do we assist the smaller players to comply? Because basically, if you're looking at this region, the informal sector is indeed very, very high. Some to the extent of even 40% of the GDP is coming from the informal sector. And of course, this group of people, they are actually really small-time employers. And in the case of Malaysia, for example, the smaller players, when I say smaller players, they are the micro enterprises. They are talking about 650,000 of the employers are small-time employers. 650,000 out of about 800,000 employees registered in Malaysia are the small and micro enterprises. Micro enterprises in the Malaysian context is those employers with less than 5 employees. So these are, I would say, that need to be basically assisted. I mean, the assistance have to be targeted. And of course, what is important is basically whatever incentive that the authorities are giving, whatever incentive that the work that the international community is doing within each particular country has to be targeted to the real sector that need assistance. Of course, the bigger employers, I think they would have their own specialists, they have their own, experts in trying to assist them to eliminate child labor, but not the smaller employers, because they are more like they don't have any funding, they don't have any expertise to address this particular issue. So when we talk about this particular subject on child labor, I think it's very important for us to really have targeted work so that these people can be really assisted. And in the case of MEF itself, we have been working very much with ILO and also the donors to actually talk about, normally we talk about forced labor and child labor together. And I remember when we did this exercise, we did a survey among the Malaysian employers. And of course, in the case of Peninsular Malaysia, they actually, rising from the survey, they found out one example or one occasion of child labor in the whole of Peninsular Malaysia. But for the East Malaysia, Sabah and Sarawak, the story is quite different, because in East Malaysia, especially Sabah, for example, they have a lot of what you call it as undocumented migrant workers, and this is where I think some of the issues of child labor exist. They exist there, and normally this is because out of necessity, because the parents would not have the capacity, financial capacity, to really ask or to put their children to childcare, thing like that. So the simplest way is to bring their children to the work site, and of course, rather than asking the children to just play around, they say that, why don't you just assist us in picking up the loose fruit? And this is where child labor do exist in that situation. But of course, these employers are really not encouraging this. Let me be frank about this. Employers really want to eliminate child labor, but the question is that how are we being assisted and be facilitated to do that? So I would like to stop there. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Datuk, for emphasizing on prevention, sector-level dialogue, and remediation pathways that encourages early actions. So we've heard now two grounded perspectives, and I would like to return to Mega, Rakesh, and friends. And from your perspective, what could we realistically strengthen so that the contribution of labor provision to child labor outcomes are implemented in light of what we've just heard? Let me invite Mega for a brief intervention on that. Mega, over to you.
Yeah, thank you, Salim. That's an important question. And can I just start by highlighting that before negotiations and inclusion of labor provisions started in modern FTAs, efforts of member states to eliminate child labor, especially in the worst form, have started way back. At regional level, we know all member states are parties to ILO Convention 182 and also implement SDGs before also MDGs. And at regional level, the ASEAN roadmap has been implemented for the last 15 years and continue to adopt bold targets by 2035. And at country level, national action plans on child labor elimination have been implemented across countries. So in a way that the inclusion of labor provisions in FTA add pressure to the industry suppliers in global supply chains for better compliance. And while, as I highlighted, member states have been engaged in FTAs, which include labor provisions at bilateral and multilateral level, but ASEAN as a group, ACAFTA or ASEAN-Canada FTA is the first FTA being negotiated for inclusion of labor provision, with the terms to be mutually agreed among the state parties. So the study that I shared earlier underlined the important points that sanctions are rarely used to address non-compliance with labor provision in trade agreements. This is based on the assessment across many FTAs globally. Instead, dialogue, cooperation, capacity building remain the most effective tools. So in a way that the inclusion of labor provision in trade agreements provides a good entry points for closer dialogue and cooperation between labor and economic sectors, where also all this time the tripartite dialogue being conducted with involvement of labor ministry, but going forward there can be broader dialogue exchange with the economic trade ministries. And I like what was highlighted earlier. France, I think, highlighted the finding of ILO study that labor provision in FTA do not decrease trade flows. So that's an important point, and how we can make it more effective on the compliance on ground. And of course, for such, we acknowledge the importance of continuing engagement of trade unions, employers association, and civil society, especially in the villages where the civil society community groups play important role for awareness raising. So let me stop there for my intervention. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mega. Let me turn now to Rakesh for a few words. Thank you, Rakesh. Over to you.
Thanks very much, Salim. Appreciate that. I guess what I would say is, when we're addressing the issue of how to combat child labor and how trade agreements or capacity building can be used to address it, there isn't really any one single change that's needed. Instead, you really need a series of measures and policies to go about addressing it. And this needs to be done at the government level, whether it's labor provisions in trade agreements or the capacity building. But you also need social dialogue, you need business practices addressed, and these measures all have to be combined in different ways through really a multi-partnership approach that takes into consideration domestic context. There's really no one-size-fits-all approach to this. The situation is different in different countries, and you have to tailor it to try and address it. But each of the tools that you can develop really have the potential to contribute to that elimination of child labor. But it's really that combination of tools and mitigating the limits and constraints that those tools and approaches have that I think it's critical. So, first and foremost, you really have to address the root causes of child labor. That's obviously perhaps the most essential component. You need to promote decent work for parents and access to social protection, access to school and quality education. You need to promote gender equality because boys and girls are obviously impacted in different ways, and to be effective, you really need collective action to take these factors into consideration. Social dialogue, those of us that work with the ILO, we know that social dialogue is really instrumental in addressing all labor issues, but particularly child labor. You have to bring together workers, employers, and governments in a substantive way to really achieve that social and economic progress to address it. You need coordination across labor and trade systems. Right now, trade policy experts, labor policy experts. There's often a gap in that dialogue where there isn't enough communication and coordination happening. And we've made progress in recent years to that. And the ILO is helping in this space as well. But I think a lot more needs to be done to address that. But I think perhaps the most fundamental piece right now, Salim, is we are living in a world right now where there is significant economic threat to industries and to governments around the world. And there is understandably very much of a focus today on how do we defend ourselves economically? How do we ensure that our economic considerations are taken into account, whether it's at the state or the enterprise level? And I think the challenge that we face is in ensuring that we convey the point that achieving economic growth does not and should not happen at the expense of labor rights and at the expense of eliminating child labor. Yes, there can be an economic cost to eliminating child labor, but we need to make the argument that the economic cost of continuing with child labor is far more significant. I think, at conferences like these and tables like these, we're often preaching to the converted. I think all of us fully appreciate the fact that child labor is an abhorrent thing that needs to be eliminated. The problem is there are many people who often don't attend these conferences that take the view that, well, it's an economic necessity and there are reasons why we have to have it. We need to reach out to those people and make the argument coherently that it is an economic cost to continue with child labor, and this is why it should be eliminated. The moral argument, the social argument, I think is well established. It is morally reprehensible to use child labor. But what we now need to do is to make that economic argument about why it is not economically feasible, viable, or right to continue using that. And I think in the current global climate that we're in, it becomes incredibly important for us to draw that linkage and to make the economic argument for eliminating child labor. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rakesh, for your words. And now let me turn to France. If you want to add a few words in light of what has been said. France, over to you.
Yeah, thanks, Salim. I feel like Rakesh almost wrapped it up, so it's hard to add anything to that. But of course, this is a very complex question, and I could say that the academic and policy debate has highlighted numerous issues in this regard, including possibilities of strengthening the complaint and dispute settlement procedures, or including social partners and other stakeholders more effectively into labor provisions, and we could have a more detailed discussion on this. One avenue that I personally find interesting, or that might have some potential, is what sometimes is referred to as a results-based approach. So in addition to negotiating broad commitments, agreeing on certain specific outcomes, and then linking those to targeted capacity building and dedicated follow-up, there may also be avenues to link labor provisions more effectively to development cooperation instruments in some contexts. And I should highlight that to some extent, sometimes also implicitly, this has already been done by some trading partners, but this approach could be used more broadly also across the board. Before wrapping up, perhaps I would just like to highlight again that it's important to recognize that labor provisions in trade agreements are, of course, not a silver bullet to address child labor or any other labor rights issues. And I think other speakers have highlighted some important caveats and pointed to some of the conditions when these instruments can be effective. And our research, perhaps just to add one more factor, our research shows that the cases where labor provisions often have the strongest effects are those that pertain to contexts where these labor provisions can support already ongoing domestic efforts and dynamics to improve certain labor issues, right? So to wrap up, the challenge is really in my view, to harness the potential that labor provisions do have in terms of addressing child labor while not overstating their potential, and at the same time really linking them to other initiatives and policy instruments at both the domestic and international level. Thank you.
Thank you very much, friends. So across the discussion, we have a number of themes emerging. We have quite a lot, so thanks to all for the contribution. And here I will just mention a few of them that really were highlighted, is the importance of implementation and follow-up. And this, of course, refers also to capacity. We have also the role of coordination between trade and labor institutions, and the centrality of social dialogue within that. Now, before we open the floor, we'd like to hear briefly from participants, and we'll ask my colleague Faye to show the QR code to a polling question, which you will be asked to identify which practical areas you see as most critical from the audience perspective. So over to you, Faye, to share the
Okay.
question.
Thank you, Selim. Yes. So I'm gonna share my screen first. Okay. So make it full screen. All right. So thank you, everyone. We prepared a short and a warm-up question on Slido to capture priorities first. So if you don't join the Slido yet, I think it's a very good moment for you to do so. So you can scan the QR code on the screen or go to slido.com and enter the event code 3904577. So please scan the QR code, and I will give everyone about perhaps 10 seconds to join. Okay, I see there's already, yeah. I see the numbers are growing now, so many people are joining. So all the participants, don't be shy. Please scan the QR code or go to slido.com and put the event number. Okay, I think most of you are already in, so let's start the question. Yes. Okay, for here, we prepared one question. Which area or which practical measure would most effectively improve the contribution of labor provisions to child labor outcomes? So you will see 5 options: follow-up, coordination, social dialogue, translation commitment into action, or data. So please select the one that reflects your view most. Okay, I'm gonna start to sharing the results. So I will give you some time to choose. So I saw the responses are coming in now. Okay, so the data seems to be a popular choice so far. Yeah. And okay, the answer are still moving in. Thank you for your active participation. So maybe I will give a few more minutes, few more seconds for all the participants to sharing their view. Okay. All right, so yeah, thank you. I think it looks like most of the audience has responded. So I will now close the poll.
Thank you.
We have the results. Yeah, over to you, Celine.
Thank you, Faye. Well, this gives us a snapshot of where priorities resonate across all the audience. And let's keep this in mind for as we move into the Q&A. So we'll have now we'll now take a limited number of questions. I'm looking also at the time, and we'll direct these questions to specific speakers to ensure balance. And thank you all that have shared, that have sent to us the question through the Slido link that was provided in the beginning. So, Faye, maybe we can.
Yes. Okay. Actually, we received plenty very excellent question on Slido, but because of the time constraints, so we will only sharing the selected questions. So this is the first question.
What is one practical adjustment to strengthen the follow-up such labor provisions and support? Maybe I will ask Mega if you will answer this question.
Thank you. I understand that the earlier answer, I think, very high on data. Indeed, this is an area of gap, and we acknowledge this in the implementation of ASEAN roadmap. However, to look into the direct impact of labor provision in trade agreement, vis-a-vis, I suppose, the impact on trade and compliance, it's really challenging to look at it and quantify it. especially where there are many instruments involved, including due diligence acts and some other commitments at various levels. And so the one practical adjustment I thought in terms of strengthening follow-ups, it's really dialogue and capacity building, not only involving the state parties of the trade agreements, but at country level and ASEAN level, the dialogue between the labor and trade ministries involving the social partners, it's really important. I think the discussion has been a lot in the labor realm, but the cross-ministerial dialogue to see the real impact on the sustainable economic growth, it's something that we need to promote more at ASEAN level. Yeah, thanks.
Thank you very much, Mega. Can we see the second question, please?
Yeah, sure. So let's move to the second question.
Given the importance of technical cooperation, what type of technical cooperation has effectively turned trade commitment into real change for child labor? Maybe I will ask Rakesh to take this question.
Sure, happy to, Salim. That's a really good question. And I think I mentioned at the beginning that, we're currently running 7 different projects addressing child labor in different parts. And I guess what I would say is the fundamental issue for us here is we don't want to pretend that we're the experts or know what the issue is that needs to be addressed. I think the type of technical cooperation that we implement has to be designed in conjunction with, first and foremost, the partner country that we're working with. Secondly, with social partners, with industry and with unions or worker organizations in the partner country that we're working with. But you also need a really good implementing or executing agency for the project as well. We don't implement these projects ourselves because our view is that we really don't have the on-the-ground capacity, knowledge, or expertise to do this. You have to have a fundamental understanding of what the conditions are on the ground. As I said before, you can't have a one-size-fits-all approach. You need to take into account domestic circumstances, considerations, and design a project accordingly. That tends to be the reason why we often tend to use the ILO as the executing agency for many of these projects, because the ILO does have that A, knowledge, B, expertise, and C, presence on the ground to be able to understand what would work and what doesn't work. And I think you have to be conscious of deferring to experts with that practical expertise on the ground, but you also need to ensure that you're speaking to the local governments and the employers and workers and civil society on the ground to ensure that you design the project taking into account local considerations. Thanks, Salim.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Rakesh. Let's move.
Yeah. So now we have the third question now. Okay.
What concrete mechanism would most strengthen the role of workers' organization in ensuring labor provision, contribute to better child labor outcomes? Maybe we can ask Mr. Dr. Pasha to take on this question.
Thanks, Salim. From trade union perspective, I must say that we are very clear that it is a decent work agenda. And I'm very happy to see that almost all the panelists are on the same page when we say decent work agenda. And we all know that it has like 4 major components: right at work, employment opportunities, social protection, and social dialogue. So if we are able to provide these, if we are able to work on the decent work agenda, definitely we understand that we can eliminate the child labor in the society. So in a nutshell, I wanted to say that 2 things. One is decent work for adult, and second, decent education for children. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pasha.
Yeah, and the next one, I think it will be for Datuk.
Yeah, for Mr. Datuk. From a business and sector level perspective, what practical change would make labor provision more workable and effective in preventing child labor?
Thank you very much, Salim. And I would say that this far, when you talk about trying to eliminate child labor, we are actually putting a lot of emphasis on trying to take action against employers. I would say that employers, when they actually engage in child labor, they are not the bigger employers, they are smaller employers. And I think this is where the approach need to change. Rather than punishing these people, I would say that they should be be educated on not to use child labor. And I would say that giving them the tools and practical aspect of eliminating child labor will be more important rather than punishing them. I would say that we should change the attitude of the law enforcers to be more friendly to the employers that may have committed child labor issues. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Datuk. And
yeah, last
more
but not
questions?
least.
Oh, last question, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, from a trade policy standpoint, what adjustment in implementation of or follow-up could make labor provision more responsive to child labor risk in practice? Friends, please, could you take on this question?
Yeah, thanks, Salim. And actually, I think part of what I said earlier has already addressed this question a little bit when I spoke about the possibility of a more results-based approach. But to explore a bit further, labor provisions in trade agreements can in some cases also benefit from impact assessments, including human rights and labor rights impact assessments prior to the agreement's entry into force, to identify issues early on and also devise strategies in terms of how to tackle them most effectively. And this again then can be followed up through more dedicated capacity building, and ideally also can be linked to consultations with stakeholders, in particular the social partners that have most often the most relevant technical expertise to address these issues early on. And there is also, in terms of institutional design, the possibility of linking the activities that are undertaking, of course, to a dedicated monitoring of the effects of these provisions in order to be able to also to adjust and perhaps strengthen the activities that are being undertaken if need be. Again, some of this has already been undertaken in some trade contexts, but I might say a more systematic approach or could be useful, or some of these lessons could be generalized also to other trade contexts. I think I'll leave it there, and perhaps also just note what has already been highlighted by other colleagues, that of course the ILO has been involved upon request of trading partners in different contexts to provide inputs, both in terms of capacity building, and I believe Rakesh has mentioned that, but also with regard to to other type of support that the constituents and the trading partners may need in this regard. I think I'll leave it there. Thank you very much, Salim.
Thank you very much, and thank you all. For synthesizing what we've heard throughout the session today, we can see that we have 5 points that really emerged. We've discussed about many different topics that are required, but if I may summarize, so the first one would be labor provisions are an important tool, but impact really depends on implementation and follow-up. The second point that change that is required that came out is the need for credible enforcement and monitoring mechanism, which really matter in terms of child labor outcomes. The third one will be institutionalized social dialogue is essential. And the fourth one is a stronger coordination across trade, labor, and child labor policy domain that is needed. And finally, labor provision are tools that do interact with a broader economic and business framework we've here about supply chain, due diligence, responsible business. And coherence among those can strengthen the impact. So progress on child labor is closely linked to progress across all fundamental principles and rights at work, and to the broader objective, as we've heard, of decent work agenda and social justice. With this said, I see we have still a few minutes, and before we close, I'd like to invite our speakers, if they have one last word or last point that will capture what matters most for the way forward. So may I ask Megha for a brief word, if you wish, of course.
Thank you, Salim. It's a privilege to be asked first, always, but also no pressure. In the discussion in ASEAN regarding the elimination of child labor, one key challenge that has been echoed by all member states is the capacity of labor inspections to ensure compliance in hard-to-reach sectors. There is a limitation of capacity to ensure effectiveness, and so the presence of modern FTAs with labor provisions, which give direct pressure in terms of the economic implication, would raise better awareness and proactiveness of the industries in the global supply chains. So in a way that it's a more balanced shared responsibilities with more direct pressure on the supplier or industry side. So by having these labor provisions, be it or regardless whether the FTA includes dispute settlement mechanism or not, what is important is such FTAs should be accompanied with continuous capacity building measures to enhance the compliance by the industries, and also the ability of governments to play more effective roles in ensuring effective inspection. And secondly, follow-up mechanisms of such labor provisions needs to involve key stakeholders across member states. So that is really an important measures that we think necessary to ensure effective implementation of labor provision in FTAs. Thank you.
Thank you, Megha. May I request Mr. Rakesh, if you wish to have a last point on the matter?
Sure. Thank you, Salim. And first of all, a huge thank you again for organizing this. I think this was a terrific event. I would agree with a lot of what Megha just said. Maybe I would wrap up by just going back to my original point about the fact that, from Canada's perspective, we need free trade agreements. These are incredibly important tools to grow the economy globally. But we often hear the argument that there should be no place in trade agreements for these types of social clauses that address labor issues. Our view is very much the opposite of that. If we want to ensure that trade agreements continue to succeed, the only way we can combat the backlash that we're seeing against these is by showing that the benefits can reach everyone in society. And from our perspective, labor provisions are one of the key ways that you can go about doing that, by ensuring that you're providing promotion and protection of fundamental rights and improving decent work conditions around the world. Trade agreements can and should play a role in doing that. I think it's important for us to put these into place. I will note that these measures are state-to-state mechanisms. There's nothing in these trade agreements that gives another country the right to go in and speak to situations in specific industries. That remains with the host government to continue doing that, which means that you continue to have to ensure that social partners are involved in these discussions and that they play an important role in it as well. But those combination of measures, I think, are critical for us to ensure that trade and economic growth continue to reach all segments of society. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And let's now hear from Dr. Pasha, please, from the workers.
Regarding worker side, sorry, I mean, you must getting some noise because I'm in the venue only. Regarding workers' perspective, I must say that these trade agreements are also very important, and especially when we see that there are labor provisions are being added. However, definitely we are keeping our eyes to see that how it's being implemented. Along with that, we also understand that there are global framework agreements, GFAs, which you know that multinational companies are signing with Global Union Federation, where we have put the clause of child labor specifically. So these are the things we understand it is in a good sense, and I must say that it will be a kind of a win-win situation for the business and for the workers. So yeah, that is from my end. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Pasha. And let me now ask Mr. Datuk for a last word from the employers.
No, thank you very much, Salim. And I would say from the employers' side, it's very important for the authorities and also the international bodies to actually build the capacity, especially on the capacity of the employers organization and also business organization to actually understand better the issues around forced child labor, so that we in turn can actually go back to the members and educate them, guide them on how child labor should be eliminated. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Datuk. And now let me turn to France. Any last word, France, from your side?
Yeah, thanks, Salim. Very briefly, I think the debate has made it clear one more time how intrinsically linked labor and trade issues are. And I would perhaps just highlight the need to addressing trade and labor issues really in an integrated manner at the policy level. And in order to do that, it is key to foster dialogue between policymakers from both the trade realm and the labor realm at different levels, including at the domestic level, of course. We are currently implementing a project with a view to fostering and supporting that dialogue in a number of countries in different regions. And I believe there is potential, in that to ensure, in addition to, of course, other avenues, to help to ensure that trade is really in sync with decent work objectives. And I think it's great that this panel has really highlighted some quite tangible avenues in this regard. Thank you.
Thank you, France. So what today's discussion suggests is not a lack actually of tools, but a need to use the existing tools deliberately through enforcement, dialogue, coordination, if labor provision are to contribute meaningfully to child labor outcomes. So with this, I would like to sincerely thank all of our distinguished speakers and all the participants that remain with us until now. And just to reiterate that this discussion contributes to ongoing reflection on how to move from commitment to implementation in eliminating child labor. Thank you very much, and have a good rest of the day and with the conference.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Salim.
Take
Thank you,
care.
everyone.